A homeless girl, just 17 years old, walked into my bakery one day, asking for a job. Now, she didn't have much experience to her name, and my better judgment told me I should probably send her on her way. But then, as she was working a piece of dough to show me what she could do, I saw a tiny crescent moon birthmark on the inside of her wrist. It was the spitting image of the one my son's girlfriend had, the sweet girl we all believed had been lost in a fire 15 years ago. And when she just happened to mention the name of the street where she'd grown up, in an orphanage of all places, well, my heart just about stopped dead in its tracks. I knew, right then and there, that my peaceful life was about to be over. The truth about that old fire was about to come roaring back to life. Now, if this story has touched your heart in some way, I hope you'll continue to tune in as we share more of these true-to-life tales together. Your support is the greatest encouragement we could ask for. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts on all this, and please, don't you ever be shy about sharing a story of your own. My bakery, Vance's Hearth, isn't just a business to me. It's my sanctuary, a fortress I built from flour, sugar, and butter to shield myself from memories I've spent 15 years trying to bury. Every morning, before the sunrise paints the Providence sky pink, I wake to the hum of the ovens, the nutty smell of raw flour, the warm spice of cinnamon, and the sweet perfume of vanilla. They wrap around me like a suit of armor. The work, it's a rhythmic salvation. Kneading, proofing, baking, those repetitive motions kept my hands busy and my mind from drifting out into the stormy seas of my memory. For 15 long years it worked. For the most part, that November afternoon was just like any other. A bitter wind was blowing in off the Atlantic, weaving through the old streets, carrying the first real bite of winter. Outside, the last of the yellow leaves clung to the wet pavement. But inside my bakery, it was warm, filled with a soft, golden light. It was 4 o'clock, and the rush was over. It was just me, the last trays of croissants, and the familiar quiet. I was meticulously wiping down the glass display case, the soft cloth's every movement reflecting the face of a 66-year-old woman. White hair pulled back in a neat bun, eyes a little hollowed out from long, sleepless nights, and wrinkles that told the story of time and grief. I'd learned to live with that reflection, the way you learn to live with an old scar. It's there, it's part of you, but you try not to stare at it for too long. The little bell on the door chimed, cutting through the silence. Usually, that cheerful sound brought a little flutter of joy, a regular customer, maybe a curious tourist. But this time, it sounded more like an alarm, a bell tolling for a change I never saw coming. A young girl stepped inside, bringing the afternoon chill right into my sanctuary. She was a slip of a thing, maybe 17, but her eyes were older than that. They were a clear, gray blue, but held a deep, profound weariness, like a still lake hiding an abyss. She wore a threadbare coat, far too big for her thin frame, and clutched a faded backpack to her chest like it was her only worldly possession. She just stood there on the threshold, hesitating, like a little lost bird looking for shelter from a storm. "Excuse me, ma'am." Her voice was clear but soft, almost lost in the whistle of the wind outside. "I saw the sign in the window. Is the position still open?" I glanced out the window. The help wanted sign had been there for 2 weeks, faded by the wind and rain. I'd interviewed a few people, but no one felt right. I needed someone quick, reliable, and most of all, someone who wouldn't bring trouble with them. The girl in front of me, with her fragile looks and sad eyes, seemed like the very definition of trouble. I should have said no. Winter was coming, the slowest season of the year. I didn't truly need the help, and I was willing to bet my last dollar her experience was next to nothing. I should have just given her a polite smile, told her the position was filled, and gone back to my cleaning, back to my carefully controlled peace. "Do you have any baking experience?" I asked, my voice coming out a little harsher than I'd intended. She shook her head, her eyes dropping to the tips of her worn-out shoes. "Not much, ma'am. I was a prep cook at a small diner, but it was mostly dishwashing, but I'm a fast learner, I promise. I'll do anything." The desperation in her voice touched a place deep inside me. I'd tried to let go hard. I sighed, setting down my cleaning cloth. "What's your name, child?" "Lily." "All right, Lily. The only experience that counts for anything in this kitchen is hands-on. I moved behind the counter and pulled out a round of dough that was proofing for the evening's bread. Show me what you can do. I sprinkled a fine layer of flour on the old oak table, a surface deeply scarred by thousands of batches of bread. I placed the soft, pliant dough in the center. You know how to knead? Lily nodded, and that initial hesitation just seemed to melt away. There was a subtle shift in her posture when faced with a task. She took off her worn coat, revealing a thin sweater underneath. Then she rolled up her sleeves. And that's when my world just stopped turning. Time froze. The only sound I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart in my chest. Everything else, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the howl of the wind, the soft hum of the ovens, it all just faded away. My entire focus was on Lily's left wrist. As she reached for the dough, the warm yellow light of the bakery caught it just right, a small, crescent-shaped scar. No, it wasn't a scar. It was paler, smoother. It was a birthmark, a perfect faint crescent moon right there over the delicate blue veins of her wrist. I dropped the wooden spoon I was holding. It clattered against the tile floor, the sharp sound echoing in the dead silence. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Lily's voice, full of concern, pulled me out of the memory that was drowning me. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at that mark. 15 years had passed, but the image was as clear as yesterday. I was sitting in my backyard, under the lilac tree. Sophia, my son's girlfriend, was laughing, her head thrown back, letting the sun catch her golden hair. She was 23, so full of life and talent, a painter whose soul was as vibrant as her canvases. I'd taken her hand, and I'd kissed that very same crescent moon. "This is God's little nightlight just for you," I had told her, "to shine on even the darkest nights." Sophia had laughed, a brilliant laugh that could light up a room. My son, Richard, stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. They looked so happy. I thought their future would be as bright as her smile. But then came the fire. A fire that tore through their apartment on Hope Street. A fire that took Sophia, and that little moon I had believed had been extinguished forever in the ashes. "Mrs. Vance?" Lily called again, her voice pulling me back to the present. I blinked, trying to take a breath. The air in the bakery suddenly felt thick, suffocating. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice hoarse. "Just a little tired." I bent down to pick up the spoon, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. How could this be? It had to be a cruel coincidence, a sick joke played by fate. It had to be. Plenty of people have scars, birthmarks, but this exact, the same shape, the same place. I tried to push the crazy thought forming in my mind away, but it was like a poison seed. Once planted, it quickly took root, spreading its venom through every fiber of my being. You just keep going," I said, taking a step back, leaning against the bread rack to steady myself. Lily hesitated for a moment, then turned back to the dough. Her hands moved with a natural, almost instinctual grace. Pushing, folding, turning. There was a rhythm, a hidden strength in her movements. She had no experience, but she had a gift, just like Sophia. Sophia had those same hands, but with paintbrushes and colors. I watched her, searching for other similarities. The slender build, the chestnut brown hair, not Sophia's gold. But those gray-blue eyes, they had a familiar depth to them. "Where are you from, Lily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I grew up here, in Providence," she answered, her eyes never leaving the dough. "Here? Whereabouts?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Lily paused. It was clearly a question that made her uncomfortable. I don't have a family. I grew up in an orphanage." "Which one?" I held my breath. She sighed, as if confessing a shameful secret. "The St. Jude's Home for Children, on Hope Street." Hope Street. This time, I couldn't keep my composure. The floor fell out from under me. The walls of the bakery, my fortress, seemed to be closing in, crushing me. The sweet smell of bread suddenly turned sickly and overwhelming. Hope Street, where Sophia's apartment burned to the ground, where my son lost the love of his life, where a part of my own soul had died. No, it couldn't be. But deep down, a cold voice whispered to me that there were no coincidences. the birthmark, Hope Street. Everything pointed to an impossible truth, a truth I had spent 15 years running from. Lily had finished kneading the dough. It was smooth, elastic, ready to be shaped. She looked up at me, a flicker of hope in her clear eyes. "Is this okay?" I looked at her. I no longer saw a skinny stranger looking for a job. I saw a ghost from the past. I saw a colossal question, and I knew that no matter how painful the answer might be, I had to find it. My manufactured peace was over. The fire from all those years ago, the one I thought had long since burned out, was starting to smolder again, and this time, I was afraid it would burn down what little I had left. "It's perfect, Lily," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You're hired. You can start tomorrow morning." The decision to hire Lily was made in a moment of pure shock, an instinctual reaction to the ghosts of my past. But as night fell and I locked the bakery door, shutting out the world, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It became a mirror, reflecting the questions that were screaming in my mind. What had I done? I'd let a complete stranger, a girl who wore the mark of an old tragedy, into my sanctuary. I'd given her a key, not just to the attic apartment, but to my life, a life I had so carefully sealed off. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark kitchen behind the shop, with only the dim glow of a street lamp filtering through the window. The rain started, tapping against the tin roof like the footsteps of returning memories. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, something I rarely touched, hoping it might soothe my frayed nerves. But the warmth of the liquor only made the images in my head sharper. I saw Richard's face again on that horrible night. Gaunt, streaked with soot, and terrifyingly empty. My son, the boy I had held in my arms, the boy with the bright smile, was gone. In his place was a broken man. "She's gone, Mom," he had whispered, his voice raw. "Sophia's gone." I had held him, felt the tremors in his tall frame, and his pain became my own. For 15 years I had believed in that pain. I had believed in his loss. But now, Lily's arrival had planted a seed of doubt in the barren soil of my faith, that birthmark, and Hope Street. Could it be possible that Sophia didn't die in the fire? Could she have survived long enough to have a child, and then leave that child on the steps of an orphanage? The thought was both insane and sparked a painful glimmer of hope. But if that were true, why didn't she come to us? Why vanish without a trace? And Richard, did my son know something? His coldness when I'd called him. That wasn't the reaction of a man who just learned the love of his life might be alive. It was the reaction of a man who'd been cornered. The next morning, Lily arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a clean, though old sweater, and her brown hair was pulled back neatly. She brought with her a fresh energy, a bright-eyed eagerness that was a stark contrast to the darkness swirling inside me. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," she said, a hesitant smile on her lips. "Where should I start?" I managed to smile back. "You can call me Eleanor, and the first thing we do every morning here is make coffee, a great big pot of it." I showed her how to use the old industrial coffee maker, how to grind the beans, how to measure the water. I watched her carefully, searching for more signs, more pieces to this impossible puzzle. The way she tilted her head when she listened, the way her long, slender fingers moved so deftly. There was nothing overtly like Sophia, but every now and then, in a fleeting moment, a look, a gesture, I'd see a flicker of familiarity, a faint echo of the past. "I'll show you how to make the blueberry scones," I said, my voice feeling mechanical. "It's an old family recipe." That was a lie. It was Sophia's recipe. She'd found it in an old Irish cookbook and had tweaked it, adding a bit of lemon zest and a pinch of cardamom. It became the bakery's bestseller. For 15 years, every time I made them, it felt like a memorial. Now here I was, passing that very recipe on to the girl who could be her daughter. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. As we worked together in the kitchen, I tried to draw her out. I asked about her life in the orphanage, about her friends, about her dreams. Lily answered cautiously, sharing only vague details. She had learned to protect herself, to build invisible walls around her heart. "Were the nuns good to you there?" I asked, my hands still sifting flour. "They did their best," she replied, her voice flat. "But there were so many of us. It was hard to pay attention to everyone." Did you ever wonder about your family? I asked, trying to sound casual. Lily stopped what she was doing for a moment. Her thin shoulders slumped. When I was little, I did. I used to dream that my parents would come for me one day, but as I got older, I figured they must have had their reasons. Maybe they couldn't keep me. Or maybe they didn't want to. That last sentence was a knife to my heart. If Sophia was alive, she would never have abandoned her child. I knew that in my bones. Sophia loved children. She used to talk about having a big family, a house filled with laughter and paint. Something was wrong here. A crucial piece of the puzzle was missing. The first day passed in a quiet tension. I wanted to pull Lily close, to hold her and search for answers in her clear eyes, and at the same time, I wanted to push her away, terrified of what I might find. That evening, I showed her to the attic room. It was small and simple, with a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a little desk overlooking the back alley. "It's not much," I said, feeling a little apologetic. Lily set her backpack on the bed. She walked over to the window, her hand brushing lightly against the glass. "It's perfect," she whispered. "I've never had my own room before." Her words sent a pang through me. I pictured Sophia, at that same age, in her art school dorm room, a chaotic space bursting with color and personality. She had had everything: talent, a future, and love. And Lily, the girl who might be her child, had never even had a space to call her own. As I turned to leave, Lily called out, "Eleanor?" "Yes, child." "Thank you for giving me a chance." I just nodded, unable to speak, and hurried down the stairs. The gratitude in her voice made me feel like a fraud. I hadn't given her a chance out of kindness. I'd done it for myself, out of a selfish need to solve a mystery that had tormented me for a decade and a half. The following days fell into a similar rhythm. By day, we were the owner and the apprentice. I taught Lily how to make sourdough starter, how to whip egg whites into perfect meringues, how to create silky smooth buttercream, and I was astonished by her natural talent. Lily had an innate feel for the ingredients, a patience and a deftness in her hands. It was as if the art of baking was in her blood. The bakery, which had been so quiet for so long, started to come alive. Lily's youthful energy drew in new customers. People liked her, her shy smile and her dedication. But at night, when we were in the apartment above the shop, the dynamic shifted. We ate our dinners in silence, exchanging only a few pleasantries about the weather or a difficult customer. The space between us wasn't one of strangers, but one filled with unspoken things. I knew she felt it too. I would sometimes catch her looking at me with a questioning gaze, as if she also sensed some strange connection, an invisible thread between us. One evening after dinner, as I was washing the dishes, Lily came quietly into the kitchen. "You have a son, don't you?" she asked softly. I flinched, nearly dropping a plate. I wiped my hands on my apron and turned to face her. "How did you know?" "I saw a photograph in the living room, a young man standing next to you. It was the last picture I'd taken with Richard before the fire. We were standing in front of the bakery, beaming. I was still so proud of my son back then." "Yes," I said, keeping my voice even. "His name is Richard. He lives in New York. He's a real estate developer." "Does he visit you much?" The innocent question was like a needle to an old wound. "Not often," I said. "He's a busy man." It was a bald-faced lie. Richard hadn't visited in 2 years, not since our last explosive argument about selling the bakery. Lily nodded, seeming to accept my answer. But I saw in her eyes a flicker of empathy, the understanding of someone who also knew what it was to be left behind. That short conversation spurred me into action. I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. I had to know the truth. That night, after Lily had gone up to her room, I did something I don't know if I'm proud or ashamed of. I crept silently up the stairs, my heart pounding. Her door was slightly ajar. Holding my breath, I gently pushed it open. The room was dark, save for the silver moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating Lily's sleeping face. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. A wave of guilt washed over me. But then I saw her hairbrush, lying on the desk. I tiptoed over and picked it up. A few strands of soft brown hair were caught in the bristles. I carefully removed them and placed them in a small zip-top bag I had brought with me. The whole thing took only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Mailing that package with Lily's hair felt like dropping a stone down a bottomless well. I didn't hear it hit the bottom, there was just a long silence and a growing sense of dread. The lab said it would be 3 weeks. 3 weeks, 21 days, 504 hours. To me, it felt like a lifetime. The first thing I thought about when I woke up was the result. The last thing I saw before I fell into a fitful sleep was the merging images of Sophia and Lily. During that agonizing wait, life in the bakery went on, but there was a subtle shift, a change in the dynamic between me and Lily. The secret I was keeping behind her back created a constant, low-level guilt, and to compensate, I found myself opening up to her more, becoming softer. I stopped seeing her as a mystery to be solved and started seeing a young soul who was starved for connection. We fell into a comfortable working rhythm. Lily, with her keen senses, had quickly mastered all the tricks of the trade. She didn't just follow recipes, she felt them. She knew when a dough needed a little more water, when a lemon tart needed a few more seconds in the oven to achieve the perfect golden crust. The kitchen, once my solitary domain, was now a space for collaboration, for quiet conversation and comfortable silences. One rainy afternoon, when customers were scarce, we were testing out a new gingerbread cookie recipe. The bakery was filled with the warm, comforting aroma of ginger, molasses, and spice. While cutting the dough, Lily suddenly paused and looked out the window, where raindrops were tracing long paths down the glass. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. The unexpected question stopped me in my tracks. I'd spent 15 years telling myself I preferred solitude, that it was a choice, but Lily's words pierced right through that armor. "Sometimes," I admitted, my own voice a little shaky. "After my husband passed, and then Richard moved away, this place got to be too big." "Your husband, what was he like?" I smiled, a sad sort of smile. "Arthur was a kind man. He could fix anything, from a broken mixer to a broken heart. He would have liked you a lot." We talked for hours. I told her about the early days of the bakery, about the struggles and the joys. And Lily, for the very first time, opened up to me about her life in the orphanage. She didn't talk about material hardship, but about the emotional void. She talked about feeling invisible, just one of many nameless faces. She told me how books became her only friends, gateways to other worlds where she could be anyone she wanted. "I found an old cookbook in the library," she said, her eyes lighting up. "It was the first time I felt like I could create something beautiful out of simple things. Flour, eggs, sugar. They were like words, and I could arrange them to tell a story." Listening to her, I saw Sophia all over again. Sophia had that same passion, but for paint. She could see a universe in a smear of blue, could tell a story with a single brushstroke. That legacy, that talent, it seemed to have been passed down, unmistakably. A week before the results were due, something happened that took our relationship to another level. It was a Saturday night, just after closing. I was in the office going over the books when I heard a loud crash from the kitchen, followed by Lily's sharp cry of pain. I rushed in. Lily was sitting on the floor, her face pale, surrounded by the shards of a large ceramic mixing bowl. Blood was welling from a deep gash in the palm of her hand. "Oh, honey," I cried out, a mother's instinct taking over. I grabbed the first aid kit and knelt beside her. "I'm so sorry," Lily sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "It just slipped. I'll pay for it." "Don't be silly," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "A bowl is just a bowl. Let me see that hand." The cut was deep. I carefully cleaned the wound, applied antiseptic, and bandaged it with a practiced hand. As I was wrapping the final layer, Lily was still crying, but it wasn't a cry of physical pain. It was the cry of a dam breaking, of years of pent-up hurt finally being released. I sat down on the floor next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. "It's okay," I whispered. "It was just an accident." "No, it's not," she said, shaking her head, burying her face in my shoulder. "I always mess things up. That's why nobody ever wanted me." My heart broke into a million pieces. I held her tightly, letting her cry it all out. I could feel the tremors in her small frame, feel the weight of 17 years of loneliness and rejection. In that moment, there were no more secrets between us, no more owner and employee, just two souls in need of comfort. I wasn't Eleanor Vance, the widowed baker, anymore. I was a grandmother, holding the grandchild I thought I had lost. After Lily had calmed down, I made her a hot cup of chamomile tea. We sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the rain. "Lily," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I want you to know that no matter what your past is, no matter where you came from, you are wanted here. You don't mess things up. You've brought light into this place." Lily looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed, but clear. "Really?" "Really," I affirmed. "You are a talented and kind young woman, and anyone who couldn't see that is the one with the problem." That night, I knew that no matter what the test results said, I would never let Lily go. She had become a part of my life, a part of this bakery. She had filled a hole I hadn't even known was there. A few days later, the email from the lab finally arrived. I waited until Lily had gone up to bed for the night. I sat in front of the computer, my hand trembling as I moved the mouse over the email icon. My heart was a wild drum in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and clicked. The attached PDF opened. I scanned past the complex scientific terms, the numbers and charts, looking for the one sentence that mattered. And then I saw it, in bold, unmistakable print. Subject A, Eleanor Vance, and Subject B, Lily, share a maternal lineage. Probability of grandparent-grandchild relationship, 99.997%. The air rushed out of my lungs. I had to read it 3 more times to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. 99.997%. The number was practically absolute. Lily was Sophia's daughter. Lily was my granddaughter. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't pure joy, and it wasn't sorrow. It was a chaotic mix of relief, pain, anger, and an overwhelming, surging love. Relief that I finally knew the truth. Pain for Sophia, for what she must have gone through. Anger at fate, at whoever caused that fire. And love for Lily, for the granddaughter I had found in the most impossible way. I put my head down on the desk, and for the first time in 15 years, I let myself truly cry. I cried for Sophia, the girl I had loved like my own daughter. I cried for Lily, for her stolen childhood. And I cried for myself, for the years I had lived in a haze of grief and deception. But through the tears, a steely resolve began to form. I had found Lily. Now, I had to find the truth about what happened to her mother, and I knew where I had to start. I had to confront the only person who could possibly have the answers, the person whose cold reaction now made a whole new kind of terrible sense. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up, showing my contacts. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in a very long time. Richard. I had to call my son. Holding the phone in my hand, I felt its weight, like a heavy stone. Richard's name on the screen seemed to mock me. My son, my own flesh and blood. But after staring at that 99.997%, a wall of ice had formed between us. I didn't see my son's name anymore. I saw the name of a suspect. I took a deep breath, trying to slow the wild galloping of my heart. I needed a clear head. I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me. I needed answers, and I knew Richard wouldn't give them up easily. He'd spent 15 years building a fortress of lies around himself, and I was about to be the first one to storm the gates. I pressed the call button. The phone rang, each ring a hammer blow against my ribs. I was about to hang up, thinking maybe I should prepare more, maybe I should talk to a lawyer first. But then, on the 4th ring, he answered. "Mom?" Richard's voice, a little surprised but with its usual controlled tone. "What's wrong? Why are you calling so late?" "We need to talk, Richard," I said. My voice was dry, foreign even to my own ears. I'd tried to keep it steady, but a slight tremble gave me away. "I'm busy," he replied curtly. "I have a big meeting in the morning. Can't it wait?" "No," I cut him off, the firmness in my own voice surprising me. "It can't wait. It's about Sophia." Dead silence on the other end of the line. It only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. In that pause, I could hear the gears turning in his head, calculating, assessing the threat. "Sophia?" he finally said, his voice now stripped of its casual tone. It was guarded, cold. "I don't understand. She's been gone for 15 years. "I'm not so sure about that anymore," I said, my eyes fixed on the lab results on the computer screen. "That girl I told you about, Lily, I did a DNA test." Another silence, this one even heavier. I could picture him in his sleek New York apartment, his handsome face tightening, his blue eyes narrowing. "You did what?" His voice was sharp as a shard of glass. "I did a DNA test," I repeated, my own voice hardening. "And it's confirmed. Lily is Sophia's daughter, which makes her my granddaughter, and your daughter, Richard." The silence this time was so long I thought he'd hung up. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, hearing only my own ragged breathing. "Now you listen to me," he finally said, and his voice was completely devoid of warmth. It was ice, cold, cruel, and laced with a threat. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to stop. Right now, that chapter closed 15 years ago. Don't go stirring up trouble for yourself." "This isn't a game," I yelled, the rage I'd been suppressing for days finally erupting. "This is a child's life. My granddaughter, your daughter." "That girl is not my daughter," he hissed through his teeth, "and she has nothing to do with us. She's probably a con artist. Maybe the lab made a mistake. Did you ever think of that? 99.997%, I said, my voice now frighteningly calm. "That's not a mistake, Richard. That's the truth. And you know it, don't you?" "Let it go," he said, his voice now almost a warning. "For your own good." And then he hung up. I sat there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The steady dial tone was like an echo of his cruel denial. Not a shred of shock, not an ounce of curiosity, no grief for Sophia, just cold, hard denial and a veiled threat. In that moment, the portrait I held of the son I had loved and raised began to shatter. I always knew Richard was ambitious, sometimes a little ruthless in his business dealings, but I never imagined he could be this heartless. His reaction wasn't that of an innocent man. It was the reaction of a guilty one, someone trying to bury a dark secret. My initial rage began to cool, replaced by a chilling fear. If Richard wasn't just a deadbeat dad, then what was he in this story? What part did he play in that fire? The questions I hadn't dared to face before now screamed in my mind. Why had Richard been so quick to collect Sophia's life insurance and use it to start his business? Why did he never want to talk about that night, always shutting me down whenever I tried to bring it up? I had always chalked it up to pain, but now I was afraid it was guilt. I knew I couldn't just sit here. I couldn't let his threat stop me. I owed it to Sophia, and more than anything, I owed it to Lily. I owed her the truth, a past, and a family. The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer a grieving mother or a lonely baker. I was a woman seeking justice. When Lily came down to the kitchen, I had coffee ready and a plate of warm scones. I looked at her, and for the first time, I let myself see her completely, my granddaughter. I saw Sophia's eyes, Richard's smile from when he was young, and a resilience that was all her own. "Lily," I began, my voice serious but gentle. "We need to talk." I led her into the living room, to the spot with the photo of me and Richard. We sat on the sofa, and I took out the printed DNA results. I placed them on the coffee table between us. "I have a story to tell you," I said. "A story about a young woman, a brilliant artist named Sophia." I told her everything. I told her about Sophia and Richard's love, about her talent and her vibrant spirit. I told her about the crescent moon birthmark, and then I told her about the fire. As I spoke, I watched Lily's face. She listened without interrupting, her eyes wide, filled with a storm of emotions, curiosity, confusion, and a deep ancestral sadness she seemed to have carried with her since birth. Finally, I slid the paper towards her. "Sophia was your mother, Lily, and I am your grandmother." Lily stared at the paper, her trembling fingers tracing over the 99.997%. She said nothing, but silent tears began to roll down her cheeks. They weren't tears of joy or sorrow, but of recognition, as if the final, missing piece of her life's puzzle, a piece she always knew was gone, had finally clicked into place. "So, my father?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. "Your father is Richard, my son." I told her about the phone call the night before, about his cold, hard denial. I didn't sugarcoat it. Lily needed to know the truth, no matter how brutal. When I finished, Lily looked up at me, and her eyes were no longer those of a child. They held a new firmness, a maturity forged in pain. He had something to do with the fire, didn't he?" she asked, a question so direct and sharp it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked my granddaughter straight in the eye. "I don't know for sure," I answered honestly, "but I'm going to find out. We're going to find out, together." In that moment, an alliance was forged. Not just grandmother and granddaughter, but two women with a shared purpose. We would turn over every stone, sift through every last ash of the past, to find out what really happened on Hope Street 15 years ago. My confession shattered the quiet surface of our life at the bakery, sending out ripples that changed everything. The air between me and Lily was no longer awkward, but it was replaced by a kind of solemn gravity, a bond forged in shared grief. We were no longer just grandmother and granddaughter. We were partners on a treacherous journey, two reluctant detectives thrown into a cold case 15 years old. In the days that followed, we moved as one. By day, the bakery remained our focus. The rhythm of kneading dough and baking bread became a kind of therapy, a familiar routine to cling to in the midst of the emotional storm. But in the quiet moments, between batches of bread, our little kitchen transformed into a war room. We started with what we had, my memories, the fragmented pieces of Sophia and Richard's life, and Lily's vague story of being found near a fire. I racked my brain, squeezing out every detail. I told Lily about the trust fund Sophia had inherited from her maternal grandparents. It wasn't a small amount. I remembered Richard complaining that Sophia was too naive with her finances, that she wanted to use a large portion of it to fund an art center for underprivileged kids. At the time, I'd just thought it was a difference of opinion. Now, it had a sinister ring to it. "Did he have access to that fund?" Lily asked, her eyes sharp and analytical. "He was her fiancé, and she'd given him power of attorney on some of her accounts." I admitted, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. She trusted him completely, and so did I. Meanwhile, something unexpected began to happen. Lily, perhaps as an outlet for her own swirling emotions, started experimenting with a new art form. She didn't just bake, she began to paint with her baking, using bags of colored buttercream like a palette and large sheet cakes as her canvases. Lily started creating true works of art. She didn't copy images, she baked her feelings. One cake depicted a starry night forest, evoking a sense of loneliness but also of hope. Another was a violent storm at sea, with waves of dark chocolate ganache crashing against a shore of crumbled cookies. Her work had depth, it had soul. It was Sophia's talent, reborn in a different, sweeter medium, but no less powerful. On a whim, I put one of her creations in the display case, a stunning cake she'd called Providence Botanical Garden. It was less a cake and more a miniature landscape, with roses piped from buttercream so exquisite you could see the individual petals, mint leaves placed just so, and dewdrops made of glistening sugar syrup. And then, a little bit of magic happened. One Tuesday afternoon, a young woman with a professional camera walked in. She introduced herself as Amelia, an influential food blogger on Instagram. The cake in the window had stopped her in her tracks. She took dozens of photos from every angle, and before she left, she bought a small slice. "This tastes as beautiful as it looks," she told me, her eyes wide with wonder. "Who made this?" "She's an artist." That night, Amelia posted her blog, a series of stunning photos with a caption that glowed with enthusiasm. "Found a hidden gem in Providence. Vance's Hearth Bakery not only has the best pastries but also edible works of art. Meet Lily, a genius cake artist who is turning pain into beauty." That post was like a match thrown on dry tinder. The next morning there was a line outside when I opened the door. The phone rang off the hook. Our email was flooded with orders for custom art cakes. Vance's Hearth Bakery, my quiet little shop, was suddenly the hottest spot in town. Lily was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She was flustered and shy, but I could see a quiet pride in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she was being seen for her talent, not for her past. Watching her beam as a customer praised her work filled my heart with a mix of joy and anxiety. I was happy for my granddaughter, that she was finally finding her place in the world, but I was also afraid. This spotlight was bright. It would attract all kinds of attention. And I knew that in New York, someone was watching. Someone who would not be happy to see a name he had tried to bury suddenly being celebrated. My fear came true a week later. The local paper, the Providence Journal, sent a reporter to do a feature story on Lily. Her story, the orphan with the extraordinary talent, was too good for them to pass up. The article ran on the front page of the lifestyle section with a huge, beautiful photo of Lily smiling, holding a cake decorated like the Milky Way. The headline read, "From Ashes to Art, the fairy tale of Providence's orphan cake queen." The article told Lily's story with sensitivity, from her years in the orphanage to finding a home and a purpose at my bakery. The reporter asked about Lily's past, and I simply said she was a special girl who had come to me by chance. I was careful not to mention Sophia or Richard. I wasn't ready to fight this war in public. Not yet. But I knew, no matter how much I tried to hide it, that article was a lighthouse in the dark. It would shine a beam right onto Richard's fortress of lies. He would see it, and he wouldn't just sit back and do nothing. I was right. 2 days after the article was published, as Lily and I were hustling to fill a huge order, the bell on the door chimed. But this time, it didn't sound cheerful. It sounded heavy, like a death knell. I looked up, and my heart seized in my chest. Standing in the doorway was Richard. He wore an expensive navy blue suit, his hair was perfectly styled, and his leather shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He didn't look like someone coming home. He looked like a corporate lawyer arriving to take over a failing company. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him, with faint dark circles under his blue eyes, but that slick, confident air was still there. Lily, who was standing next to me, froze. She had never met him, but some deep instinct must have told her exactly who this man was. I looked at my son, the man I gave birth to, and all I felt was a cold, chilling distance. I knew this visit wasn't a coincidence. He wasn't here to make amends. He was here because of the article. He was here because Lily was becoming a name, a person who couldn't be so easily ignored or silenced. He was here to do damage control. He strode into the shop, bringing a cold New York City draft with him. His eyes swept over the pastry cases, over the curious customers, and finally, they landed on Lily. A complex expression flickered across his face, surprise, calculation, and maybe, for just a fraction of a second, something that looked like regret. But then it was gone, replaced by a well-practiced smile. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Mom," he said, his voice trying for casual as it echoed through the bakery. "It's been a while." But his eyes were still locked on Lily. Richard's presence in the bakery was like a glacier suddenly appearing in a warm sea. The air instantly turned cold and tense. The customers' chatter dwindled to a hush. All eyes were on the man in the expensive suit, the man who so clearly did not belong in this warm, humble space. I stood rooted behind the counter, my hands clenched into fists beneath my apron, my knuckles white. Beside me, Lily was as still as a statue, her wide eyes fixed on the face of the man she knew was her father. I could feel the storm inside her: curiosity, fear, and maybe a tiny, toxic sliver of hope that I wanted to extinguish immediately. Richard ignored the curious stares. He acted as if he were on a stage, and this was the performance of his life. He walked toward us with long, confident strides, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the wariness in his eyes. "Aren't you going to introduce us, Mom?" he asked, that fake smile still plastered on his face, but his voice held an edge of sarcasm. I took a deep breath, fighting for control. "Richard, this is Lily. Lily, this is Richard Vance, my son." I deliberately left out the word father. I wouldn't grant him that title so easily. Richard extended a hand to Lily. It was a polite, but completely detached gesture. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lily. I read the article. You're very talented." Lily looked at me hesitantly, as if asking for permission. I gave a slight nod. She shyly put her hand out, and her slender, flower-dusted hand was swallowed up by his large, manicured one. The handshake lasted only a second, but it felt like it contained all 17 years of distance and deceit. Thank you, Lily stammered, quickly pulling her hand back. I brought a little something, Richard said, and he gestured toward the door. A young assistant scurried in, carrying an enormous bouquet of white lilies wrapped in fancy cellophane. My blood ran cold. White lilies, they were Sophia's favorite. They were the flowers he placed on her grave every year, for the first few years. A gesture that had once seemed so poignant now felt grotesque, a desecration of her memory. He was using the very symbol of their love to manipulate the daughter he'd abandoned. I thought your mother would have liked them, Richard said, his voice laced with practiced emotion, his eyes locked on Lily. Lily was stunned, taking a step back as if struck by the tragic beauty of the flowers. I moved forward, physically placing myself between Richard and Lily. Thank you for the thought, I said, my voice like ice. But we don't have room for them here. I turned to the assistant. You can take those back. The open hostility in my voice flustered the young man. Richard's brow furrowed, the smile on his face faltering. Mom, he said under his breath, his tone chiding. I was just trying to. I know what you're trying to do, Richard. I cut him off. Lily, go check on the croissants in the back. I think they're about to burn. Lily, grateful for the escape, nodded quickly and disappeared through the kitchen door. Now it was just the two of us. The last few customers, sensing the tension, had quickly paid and left. The bakery fell eerily silent. What do you think you're doing? Richard hissed, his polished facade finally cracking. Trying to make me look like the bad guy in front of her? You don't need my help for that, I shot back. Your little performance was disgusting, Richard. White lilies? Do you really think she and I are that naive? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He was switching tactics. You don't understand. When you called, I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. For 15 years, I've lived with that grief. I built walls around myself just to survive. Lily's existence, it shattered them all. He was good, I'll give him that. His voice dropped, becoming thick with supposed regret. He looked at me with those blue eyes I once adored, now glistening as if on the verge of tears. He spoke of sleepless nights, of the guilt that ate away at him, of how scared he was to face a past he'd tried so hard to bury. He was a magnificent actor, and I was his audience of one. But I wasn't the same blind mother anymore. I had heard the coldness in that phone call. I had seen the calculation in his eyes when he walked in here. So, why are you here now, Richard? I asked him point blank. Why today, right after the article came out? Why not the day after I called you? Because I needed time, he said, his voice rising. I needed time to process it. The article, it just made me realize I couldn't hide anymore. She's out there, in the public eye. I owe her an explanation. I owe Sophia, and I owe it to myself. He moved closer, his voice becoming earnest. Mom, I know I messed up. I panicked and I pushed everyone away, but I want to make it right. Please, give me a chance. Give me a chance to be a father. Give us a chance to be a family. Those words, a family, should have moved me, but they just made my stomach clench. He wasn't talking about family. He was talking about control. He saw Lily becoming a public figure, a potential asset, and possibly a threat. He needed to pull her to his side, get her under his thumb, before it was too late. The kitchen door creaked open. Lily was standing there, a dish towel in her hand, having clearly heard everything. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with confusion. Richard's words, so transparent to me, must have sounded like everything a 17-year-old girl who dreamed of a father her whole life would want to hear. Richard saw her. He immediately turned, his face arranging itself back into a mask of anguish. Lily, he said, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. For everything. I've been a coward. I looked at Lily, trying to send her a silent warning. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Richard, this handsome, broken man who had appeared out of nowhere and claimed to be her father. Could I take you both to dinner? Richard asked, his voice full of hope. Just to talk. No pressure. I was about to refuse, but Lily spoke first. Okay, she whispered. My heart sank. Richard smiled, a flicker of triumph crossing his face before he could mask it. "That's wonderful," he said. "Tomorrow night? There's a new Italian place downtown. I'll make a reservation." He gave Lily one last warm look, nodded politely to me, and then turned and left, leaving the rejected bouquet of white lilies on an empty table. When his Audi was out of sight, Lily finally turned to me, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly. "You don't trust him." "Trust is something you earn, Lily," I replied, my voice weary. "It's not something you can buy with a bouquet of flowers and a few pretty words." "But what if? What if he's telling the truth?" she asked, her voice laced with a painful longing. "What if he really is sorry? Everyone deserves a second chance, right?" I looked into my granddaughter's eyes, and I saw the war between her head and her heart. Her head, conditioned by years of disappointment, was telling her to be careful, but the heart of an orphan was desperate to believe, to be loved. I couldn't forbid her from going. He was her father, and she had a right to know him, but I wasn't about to let her go alone. "All right," I said, "we'll go to dinner, but we go together, and we listen. But you remember this, Lily, some performances are so good, even the actor starts to believe they're real." That night, as I was cleaning up, I picked up the bouquet of white lilies. Their petals were pure and perfect, but to me, they were stained with the color of lies. I carried them out to the back alley and threw them straight into the dumpster. The dinner the next evening was a strange, tense affair. Richard had picked a fancy Italian restaurant where the candlelight and soft music tried and failed to mask the awkwardness between the three of us. He played his part to perfection. He asked Lily about her life, her dreams, listening with rapt attention, nodding at all the right moments, and offering bits of fatherly-sounding advice. He told funny stories about his own childhood, trying to weave a false thread of family connection. Lily, despite my warnings, was clearly captivated. For the first time in her life, she had the full, undivided attention of a father figure. She answered his questions hesitantly at first, but gradually opened up, a small smile occasionally touching her lips. I sat there, a silent observer, watching every move, analyzing every word. I saw how Richard's eyes lit up when Lily talked about the success of her art cakes, how he skillfully steered the conversation toward business and merchandising potential. He wasn't interested in Lily the person, he was assessing an asset. When the meal was over, Richard offered to drive us home. "I have to be back in New York next week," he said, "but I'll be back soon. We have a lot of catching up to do." In the quiet of his luxury car on the way home, a cold fury began to build inside me. He was playing a dangerous game, and Lily was his pawn. I knew I couldn't just sit back and react to his moves anymore. I needed to find something, some hard proof, an undeniable truth to shatter this charade before Lily was completely drawn in. That night, after Lily went to her room, I couldn't sleep. The image of Sophia kept coming back to me, not the happy girl in the garden, but a fainter, more troubled memory from the last few weeks before she died. I remembered Sophia had become quiet, withdrawn. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes. When I'd asked, she just said she was stressed about an upcoming gallery show, but now I realized that was a lie. Something else had been eating at her. Driven by a hunch, I went up to the attic, where I kept old mementos. Not Lily's room, but a small, dusty storage space filled with cobwebs. In a corner, under a white dust sheet, were the things of Sophia's I had salvaged from the fire, the few items that hadn't been completely destroyed. A few smoke-stained art books, a box of dried-up watercolors, and a stack of sketchbooks. And most importantly, her easel. I pulled off the sheet. On the easel, her last unfinished oil painting was still in place, the one I'd found when I was clearing out what was left of the apartment. The police had deemed it of no evidentiary value, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was the last piece of her soul. I carried the easel down to the living room and set it up under the bright lamp. For 15 years, I had only been able to glance at it. The pain was too much. But tonight, I looked at it with a new purpose. I was looking for a message. The painting was the view from her apartment window on Hope Street. A familiar scene of red brick rooftops, green trees, and a sliver of a pale purple evening sky. Sophia's brushwork was, as always, both loose and precise. But as I looked closer, I started to see things that were off, details I had missed before. The whole painting had a sense of unease. The sky wasn't peaceful. Dark, brooding clouds gathered on the horizon. The shadows of the buildings were strangely long and sharp, like daggers. There was a tension in every stroke. And then I saw it. My eyes were drawn to the base of an old oak tree in the bottom left corner of the canvas. That oak tree was real. I remembered it. It stood on the sidewalk across from her building, but in Sophia's painting, the shadow cast by the base of the tree was unnatural. It didn't follow the light, and its shape— I squinted, moving closer. Sophia had used a different technique here. The paint was thicker, built up, creating a texture that was different from the rest of the canvas. And as I stared at it, my heart began to pound. The shadow wasn't a shadow. It was deliberately shaped to look like an object. An old-fashioned skeleton key, hidden, almost invisible to the casual observer, but clear as day to someone who was looking for it. Why? Why would Sophia paint a hidden key in the shadow of an oak tree? It couldn't be random. Sophia never painted anything randomly. Every detail in her work had meaning. I stood frozen in front of the canvas, my mind racing. A key. An oak tree on Hope Street. Was it a code? A clue she had left behind, knowing something bad might happen? The next day, I couldn't focus on a thing. The image of that hidden key haunted me. I knew I had to go there. I had to go to Hope Street. I told Lily I had to meet with an old supplier. It was a lie, but I wasn't ready to pull her into this yet. I didn't want to give her false hope if it turned out to be nothing. I drove to the old neighborhood. It had changed so much. The apartment building where Sophia had lived was long gone, replaced by a sleek modern complex. The little shops were gone too, replaced by chain coffee shops and boutiques. But one thing hadn't changed. The old oak tree was still there, massive and silent, a mute witness to the tragedies that had unfolded under its branches. I parked the car and walked over to it, my heart hammering in my chest. People walked by, paying no mind to the old woman staring intently at the base of a tree. I circled it, my eyes scanning every inch of the ground, every crack in the sidewalk. I thought back to the painting. The key was in the shadow, on the side closest to the curb. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe. My fingers explored the ground, the loose pebbles and dry leaves. And then, my fingertips brushed against something different, a single paving stone. It was slightly loose. I glanced around. No one was watching. I dug my fingernails into the crack and tried to pry the stone up. It was stuck fast at first, but then it shifted. I worked it out of its place, revealing a small, hollowed-out space beneath. And inside that space, wrapped in layers of old, brittle oilcloth to protect it from the damp, was a hard object. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was a small metal box, the kind people used to keep cookies in, rusted with age. It was heavier than I expected. I quickly put the stone back in place, clutched the box to my chest, and walked quickly back to my car. Once inside, I locked the doors, breathing heavily as if I'd just run a marathon. I had found it. I had found Sophia's message. I drove back to the bakery in a daze. The old metal box sat on the passenger seat, silent but carrying the weight of a life. I could feel its presence, a tangible echo from the past, a promise of the truth. I wasn't scared anymore, just filled with a burning urgency. I had to know. Lily had to know. When I got back, the bakery was closed for the day. The warm, yellow light from the apartment window above told me Lily was home. I let myself in the back door, holding the box to my chest as if it were a fragile heart that might shatter at any moment. Lily was at the kitchen table, sketching a new cake design in a notebook. She looked up when I came in, a small smile on her face, but the smile vanished when she saw the look on my face and the box in my hands. "Eleanor," she asked, her voice filled with worry. "What's wrong? Where have you been?" I set the box on the kitchen table. The sound of metal on wood was a dry, final sound in the quiet kitchen. "I went to Hope Street," I said, my voice hoarse. I think I found something your mother left behind." Lily's eyes widened, fixated on the rusted box. She slowly rose and walked over to the table, her trembling fingers reaching out but not daring to touch it. "What?" "What's in it?" "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but we're going to find out together." The box wasn't locked. The lid was fused shut by years of rust and neglect. I had to use a small paring knife to pry it open. When the lid popped free with a soft groan, a musty, ancient smell of paper and memory wafted out. We both held our breath and looked inside. The first thing we saw was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was slightly warped from the damp, but it looked intact. Beneath the journal was a sheaf of papers, tied with a faded sky-blue silk ribbon, Sophia's favorite color, and sitting right on top was a single yellowed envelope. On it, in Sophia's familiar, elegant script, were 2 words, "For my daughter." Lily let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears instantly welled in her eyes. I carefully lifted out the letter first. It was light as a feather, but I could feel the weight of 17 years of waiting in it. I handed it to Lily. "This is for you," I said softly. Lily's hands shook as she took it. She looked at me, as if for permission. I nodded. "Go on, honey. Read it." Lily sat down, carefully tearing open the envelope. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded in fourths. As she unfolded it, I could see Sophia's handwriting, steady and full of emotion. Lily began to read, at first in a whisper to herself, but then her voice grew stronger, as if she wanted the whole world to hear her mother's final message. "My little angel," Lily read, her voice thick with unshed tears. "If you are reading this, it means I wasn't able to be there to watch you grow. It breaks my heart to think of it, but I need you to know that for the short time I had you, you were the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. You were my light, my hope." Lily paused, taking a shaky breath to hold back a sob. I placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent comfort. "I'm writing this because I'm scared. The man you will know as your father, Richard Vance, is not who he seems. I loved him, I trusted him, but I've discovered a terrible truth. He has been taking money from my trust fund, a very large amount, to fund his own failing business ventures. When I confronted him, he became someone else. He threatened me, told me I would regret it if I ruined his future." Lily's voice trembled with rage. He threatened her. "I am going to my lawyer tomorrow morning," Lily read on. "I'm going to change my will, to make sure everything I have goes to you. I'm afraid Richard won't let me do it. If something happens to me, Lily, please, never trust him. The proof of what he's done is in the bank records. But most of all, know that I love you. I love you more than life itself. Live a happy, brilliant life for both of us. Be kind, be strong, and never let anyone dim your light." The letter ended with a slightly smudged signature, "Your mother, Sophia." When Lily finished, the room was silent, filled only with the sound of her quiet, heartbroken sobs. She clutched the letter to her chest, as if she were holding the mother she never knew. I wrapped my arms around my granddaughter, letting her grief wash over me, mingling with my own. This wasn't just a letter, it was an indictment from the grave, irrefutable proof of Richard's lies. After a long while, when Lily had quieted a little, I carefully lifted the journal from the box. Its leather cover was soft and familiar. I opened it to the first page. Sophia's handwriting filled the page, recounting the happy days when she first discovered she was pregnant. We sat together for hours, reading through the diary. It was a detailed account of the last weeks of Sophia's life, the joy of feeling Lily's first kick, the anxiety as her relationship with Richard began to sour, and then the horror of discovering his theft. The journal painted a complete, terrifying picture. Sophia had confronted Richard on that fateful night. He hadn't denied it, just coldly told her it was money he deserved. Sophia told him she was going to the police. "You won't do anything," he had said, according to her entry. "You're not going to ruin me." The final entry was scrawled, the handwriting shaky and blurred by tears. "He just left. He had a terrible look in his eyes. He said everything would be taken care of by tomorrow. I don't know what he means. I've hidden this box. I'm scared. Please, God, protect my baby girl." Those were the last words she ever wrote. That night, her apartment burned. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. There was no doubt left. This was not an accident. Richard may not have lit the match himself, but he was the cause. He had driven Sophia to her death to silence her and steal her inheritance. I looked at Lily. The tears had dried on her cheeks, but her eyes were blazing. It wasn't the fire of destruction, but the fire of justice. Her innocence had been burned away, replaced by a steely resolve. "We have to do something," she said, her voice steady now. "We can't let him get away with this." "No, we won't," I agreed, feeling a new strength rise in me, fueled by my granddaughter's courage. "But we have to be smart. Richard is dangerous. We can't go after him head-on without a plan." I lifted the last bundle of papers from the box. They were old bank statements, documents from the trust fund, and most importantly, a copy of the letter Sophia had sent to her lawyer, requesting an appointment to change her will. "Here," I said, pointing to the papers. "This is our ammunition. Your mother's journal and letter are the motive, but these numbers, these transactions, this is the undeniable proof of his crime. He thought the fire destroyed everything, but he was wrong." A plan began to form in my mind. A bold, dangerous, but necessary plan. We couldn't just take this to the police. After 15 years, proving arson and murder would be difficult. But we could expose him in another way. We would use the very stage he loved to bring down the curtain on his act. "Lily," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "you have that big event coming up, don't you? The gallery opening for your cake collection." Lily nodded. "Yes, at the downtown art gallery. Richard said he was going to introduce me." "Perfect," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "We're going to give him an opening night he will never, ever forget." The days after discovering Sophia's box felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. All around us, life went on as normal. The bakery buzzed with customers, the air smelled of fresh bread, and the happy chatter of patrons filled the space. But at the center of it all, where it was just me and Lily, there was a heavy silence, an intense focus. We were no longer passive victims of the past. We had become the executors of a lost soul's will. The plan was hatched in the very kitchen where it all began. That night, after we'd read every word of the journal and the letter, we sat across from each other at the old wooden table, the metal box between us like a silent witness. The grief was still there, a raw, deep ache, but it had been tempered into something else, an iron resolve. "He can't get away with it," Lily said, not a trace of a tremor left in her voice. The fire in her gray-blue eyes had replaced the tears. "Not after what he did to my mother." "No, he won't," I replied, my own voice firm. "But we can't be reckless. Richard is slick and powerful. If we confront him directly, he'll deny everything, maybe even turn it around on us." I had an old friend, David Chen, a retired lawyer who was still as sharp as a tack. The next morning I called him, telling him only that I needed advice on a sensitive family matter. We met at a quiet cafe in the old part of town. I brought the journal and the letter. When I placed them on the table, David looked at me with a skeptical eye. "Eleanor," he said, "this was 15 years ago. Memories can be tricky, and they're just words." "Just read them, David," I urged. And he did. I watched his face change from skepticism to concentration, then to shock, and finally to a quiet rage. When he finished the last diary entry, he looked up, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Good heavens," he whispered, "the son of a bee." "I need your help, David," I said. "This journal is the motive, but I need irrefutable proof, bank transactions, anything that can trace the money from Sophia's fund to Richard's company right after the fire." "It won't be easy," he warned. "After 15 years, a lot of records get purged. But I know a few people. I'll make some calls." For the next week, we lived a double life. By day, we were Eleanor and Lily of the bakery. Lily threw herself into preparing for her art show. Her cakes became bolder, more complex. One was a magnificent phoenix rising from chocolate flames, its wings made of spun amber sugar. I knew it was her tribute to her mother. Richard called almost every day, playing the part of the doting, rediscovered father to perfection. He asked about the show, offered advice on promotion, promised he would invite influential people from the New York art scene. Every call was a form of torture. Lily and I had to play along, to sound happy and grateful while our stomachs churned with revulsion. "Just think of it like we're baking a very complicated cake," I told Lily one evening when she looked exhausted from the strain. "We have to follow the recipe exactly, we have to be patient, and we can't let the cake know our real intentions until we put it in the oven." A week before the show, David called back. "I've got it," he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. Not one, but 3 major transfers, made within 48 hours of Sophia's death certificate being issued. The money went from the trust account to a shell corporation, and from there into the accounts of Vance Development. It was clever, but not clever enough. He emailed me the documents. That night, Lily and I sat side by side, looking at the cold, hard numbers on the screen. They matched Sophia's diary entries perfectly. This was it, the final nail in the coffin of Richard's lies. I copied all the file scans of the diary, the letter, and the bank statements onto a tiny USB drive, a time bomb that fit in the palm of my hand. The night of the gallery opening arrived. The art gallery was a sleek, minimalist space with white walls and bright track lighting. It was the complete opposite of the bakery's warmth. This was Richard's world, glamorous, cold, and fake. Lily looked beautiful in a simple, dark blue dress. Her hair was up, showing her elegant neck, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept unconsciously touching the birthmark on her wrist. I went to her and squeezed her hand. "Your mother would be so proud of you," I whispered, "and so am I." Richard was the star of the show. He moved through the room, champagne flute in hand, shaking hands, introducing Lily with the beaming smile of a proud father. He was puffing out his chest, a smug satisfaction hidden behind a mask of false humility. He was savoring this moment, a moment where he believed he had taken control of the situation, turning a potential threat into a perfect PR story for himself. I stood in a corner, watching quietly. Inside my small clutch, the USB drive felt cold against my fingers. I felt like an assassin, waiting for the right moment. My heart was beating slow and steady. A strange calm had washed over me. No more fear, no more doubt, just purpose. At 8 o'clock sharp, the gallery director stepped up to a small podium and invited Richard Vance, the proud father and patron of this exhibit, to say a few words. The room quieted. All eyes were on my son as he stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted it, smiling out at the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice warm and charismatic. "It is such an honor to be here tonight. 15 years ago, the art world lost a tremendous talent, a young woman named Sophia, whom I loved very, very much." He paused, pretending to choke back emotion. My stomach turned. "That tragedy," he continued, "left a hole that could never be filled. But as they say, from the ashes, new life can spring. Tonight, we are here to witness that rebirth. We are here to celebrate a new talent, a young artist who has transformed her own pain and loss into works of sweet, hopeful art. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so incredibly proud to introduce you to my daughter, Lily." A wave of applause filled the room. Richard smiled, opening his arms toward Lily, who stood shyly beside the stage. It was a perfect performance, a touching story of redemption and hope. But his show was about to have its finale. As the applause died down, and before Richard could step away from the podium, I made my move. I stepped out from my corner and walked directly toward the stage. Every head turned to watch me, including Richard's, his expression shifting from pride to surprise and annoyance. I walked up the steps and stood right next to my son. I took the spare microphone from the gallery director's hand. "Thank you for those lovely words, Richard," I said, my voice calm but carrying through the now silent room. "You spoke of rebirth, so let's talk about the truth. The truth of the night Sophia and her legacy were almost buried forever." Richard's face hardened, his smile vanished. "Mom," he hissed, just loud enough for me to hear, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" I ignored him. I turned to the stunned crowd. Tonight, Sophia's daughter will share her art, but before she does, there's another story that needs to be told. A story written in Sophia's own hand. I gave a signal to the A divided by V technician, a man David had arranged for. On the large screen behind Richard, which had been showing beautiful images of Lily's cakes, the picture suddenly changed. It was now a high-resolution scan of a yellowed page, covered in elegant, looping handwriting, the last page of Sophia's diary. The room held its breath. Richard turned and looked at the screen, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw pure, unadulterated panic in my son's eyes. The silence in the gallery was as thick and heavy as a velvet curtain. All sound ceased, except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the frantic drumming of my own heart. On the big screen, Sophia's words were an indictment from beyond the grave, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of lies Richard had built. He just left. He had a terrible look in his eyes. "I'm scared. Please, God, protect my baby girl." I looked at Richard. His confident mask had crumbled to dust. His face was ashen, dotted with sweat. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like an actor who had forgotten his lines in the middle of the play's climax, stranded and exposed under the harsh stage lights. I raised the microphone, and my voice rang out, clear and steady, filling the dead air. Those were the last words Sophia ever wrote, just hours before her apartment burned to the ground. She was scared, and she had every reason to be. I signaled the technician again. The image on the screen shifted from the diary page to a spreadsheet of cold, hard numbers, a bank statement. Sophia was scared because she had discovered the truth, I continued, my voice stripped of all emotion, leaving only cold fact. The truth that the man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from her trust fund. And when she confronted him, he threatened her. This is the proof that within 48 hours of Sophia's death, that money was expertly funneled into the accounts of the Vance Development Company. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. People turned to look at each other, then back at Richard with entirely new eyes. The admiration was gone, replaced by suspicion and disgust. Cell phones were raised, their small red lights blinking as they began to record. Richard's play wasn't just ending, it was being documented for the world to see. "Mom, stop it." Richard finally managed to croak, his voice ragged with desperation. He took a step toward me, as if to snatch the microphone away. But I didn't flinch. "Stop, Richard?" I said, looking my son directly in the eye, letting him see the full measure of my contempt. "Is that what you said to Sophia? When she told you she was going to the police? When she said she wouldn't let you destroy her future and the future of her child?" Just then, two men in plain clothes who had been standing quietly near the exit began to move. They walked calmly through the parting crowd and up onto the stage. One of them placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder. "Mr. Richard Vance?" One of the detectives said, his voice low and authoritative. "We'd like you to come with us to answer a few questions regarding the death of Sophia Rossi and certain financial irregularities." Richard just deflated. All the fight went out of him. He didn't resist. He just stood there, trembling, as the second detective gently cuffed his hands behind his back. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent room, the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. As they led Richard across the stage, he passed Lily, who had been frozen in place this whole time. He paused for a second, looking at his daughter. In his eyes, I saw no remorse, only the bitter sting of defeat and a raw, naked hatred. "You," he spat at Lily, "this is all your fault." Before he could say anything more, the detective pulled him along. He was led through the silent crowd, past the flashing cameras, out of the gallery, and out of our lives. When the door closed behind him, the room remained silent for another moment. Then, someone started to clap, then another, and then the entire room erupted in a thunderous, sustained applause. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for Sophia. They were clapping for Lily. They were clapping for the truth. I stepped down from the stage and walked to Lily. She was still motionless, tears streaming down her face, but a trembling smile was on her lips. I wrapped my arms around her and held on tight. "It's over," I whispered into her hair. "It's all over, my sweet girl." A few weeks later, our lives began to find a new normal, but it was a normal we had never known before. Vance's Hearth Bakery became more famous than ever, not just for the pastries but for the story. People came to show their support, to offer a kind word, to be a small part of a story of survival and justice. Richard was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and manslaughter. With the evidence stacked against him, he never stood a chance. He was sentenced to a long prison term. His real estate empire crumbled. His name became synonymous with deceit. He lost everything, just as he had tried to take everything from Sophia. Our lawyer informed us that according to Sophia's last wishes, her entire trust, including the stolen money recovered from Richard's assets, now belonged to her only legal heir, Lily. Overnight, the orphan girl with nothing to her name became a wealthy heiress. One sunny afternoon, as we were working on a new batch of dough in our familiar kitchen, Lily turned to me, her eyes clear and serious. "Grandma, what are we going to do with all this money?" I wiped my hands on my apron and smiled. For the first time in years, it was a real smile, one that came from deep inside. "First," I said, "we're going to buy the best vanilla beans in the world, the kind from Madagascar." Lily giggled. "And then," I continued, placing my hand over hers, "you are going to fulfill your mother's dream. We're going to use that money to start the Sophia Rossi Arts Foundation, a scholarship fund for young, underprivileged, and orphaned artists. We're going to build an art center, right here in Providence." Lily's eyes lit up, a place where kids like me can go to paint, to create, to find their voice. "That's right," I said. "That fire took so much from us. It took your mother, it took my peace. But ashes, my dear girl, are the most fertile ground for new beginnings. We're going to turn your mother's legacy into something beautiful, something that will last forever." Sometimes, people ask me about Richard. They're curious how I feel about my only son, wasting away in a prison cell. They expect a simple answer: hatred, forgiveness, maybe a lingering pain. But the truth is more complicated. I don't visit him. I don't write. It's not because I hate him, though, a part of me certainly does, but because the man named Richard Vance, my son, truly died for me on the night he coldly denied his own child over the phone. The person in that prison is just a stranger with his face, a ghost of greed and cruelty. I don't feel anger anymore, just a hollow emptiness, a profound sadness for the boy I once raised, for the good that was in him that he himself snuffed out. Perhaps that's the greatest punishment of all, not the prison bars, but being completely forgotten by the mother who gave you life. Instead of looking back at that tainted past, I choose to cultivate the future. Lily's in my life has found a new rhythm, a peace we fought for and won. Our mornings still start with the smell of coffee and flour, but the undercurrent of tension is gone. In its place is the sound of Lily's laughter as she experiments with a new recipe, and lively debates over whether to use Belgian or Swiss chocolate for the mousse. The bakery, Vance's Hearth, has become more than a business. It's a community landmark, a place where people come not just for bread, but for a dose of warmth and hope. We hung a small brass plaque near the door. It simply reads, "In memory of Sophia Rossi, an artist whose soul could light up the darkest places." The Sophia Rossi Arts Foundation became a reality. We bought an old warehouse down by the river and are in the process of turning it into a vibrant arts center with sunlit studios, a pottery workshop, and yes, a teaching kitchen for cake artistry. Lily has poured her heart into this project. I see Sophia in her every day, in her passion, her compassion, and the way she talks about giving other kids the chance her mother never fully had. One Sunday in early spring, as the first daffodils were starting to bloom, Lily and I did something we'd been putting off. We drove to the city cemetery. For 15 years, I had made this trip alone, placing a bouquet of white lilies on an empty grave and whispering apologies. But today was different. We didn't bring lilies. Instead, Lily had made a small, simple